the Weekly Show with David J. Maloney.
This week, David chats with writer-director Jesse V. Johnson.
And now, here's your host, David J. Maloney.
Welcome, everyone, to The Weekly Show. I'm your host, David J. Maloney. On tonight's show, we've got the next part of my interview with director Jesse V. Johnson. Jesse is one of the film industry's rising action film writers and directors whose new film, One Ranger, with Thomas Jane and John Malkovich, released into theaters this month. His prolific stunt career in the industry has led him to working in some of the biggest films over the last 3 decades and with some of its biggest stars and directors. Here, after the break, to chat about his incredible career and his new film, One Ranger, is director Jesse V. Johnson. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. This film's got a pretty grand scale with some quite elaborate and intricate scenes throughout. I mean, there's a tank in one part of the film. I mean, what was the hardest part about shooting your action scenes, and what is your process for getting them right?
Yeah, I found out the special effects man had his own tank. He showed me a picture of it. So then I begged him to bring it in for that one scene. So the tank was there. It's been mentioned by quite a few reviewers, so we probably should have used the tank more. But there you go. It was an afterthought. Action on a film like this, which is extraordinary tight budget, really, really tight schedule, is just making sure everyone knows exactly what they're doing, where they're supposed to be, what's going to be working. Well, the gun guy in England, you have to have 2 gun guys when they come out to set. In America, you have 1 armor. In England, you have to have 2.
Yeah, well, we've learned about that lately.
Yeah, 1 guy stays at the vehicle, 1 guy stays on set, meaning that at no point are the guns left unsupervised in any way, shape, or form. They have a lot more stricter rules there. And the guns we were working with, the machine guns and belt feds, which are particularly sort of warlike and terrifying for certain people. So we those 2 guys are earning more than your 4 camera ACs put together combined, because there is only a finite amount of people with the licenses for guns. So in a film where you have guns in every single scene, you then have to work out how I've only got budgeted for 5 days of gun guys. So you have to make sure that when there's guns being fired, because the replica guns don't require a handler. So they could be every day, but wherever the gun's fired, we had to make sure that it fell on one of those 4 or 5 days. So it becomes a very complex game of scheduling and logistics and timing and making sure that the sun was going down at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So you have to make sure you're one building we had that was completely glass, which is great. Well, the sun was up in the air, but the moment it went down, we couldn't fake it anymore. We couldn't put lights on it and pretend it was day for night, because you've got all these huge windows. So you were done filming at 3 o'clock, which is nightmarish. A short day is the worst thing for a director. The crew love it, but the director will be chewing his arm off by that point. So you're really, really focused on doing everything as efficiently, as quickly as possible. And then on top of that, you're dealing with stunts, special effects, gunfire, fighting, knives, vehicles. So everything has to be safe, which takes a little bit longer, as I'm sure you're aware. The crew needs to know what's going on. So you have what's called a safety meeting. You see people on their phone and talking and sort of drifting off into nowhere while that's going on. So most of them haven't listened at that point. So you have to go through it a second time individually with each department to make sure that they're aware of what's going on. Safety meeting is often only for the insurance's sake, and it drives me nuts because it takes a long time. And I end up having to do it again for everyone anyway. But it's the nature of what we do. And making sure people are in safe positions. No one's going to get hurt. The assistant director, who in the case on that film was very inexperienced, had never done an action film before. So myself and the stunt coordinators had to take him through how it was going to be handled and how things were going to work, and what speed we could go at that was a safe speed to work at, but was not jeopardizing anyone's safety. So those are things that take priority. And then from that, you have to try and make it creative and interesting. And the camera setups look beautiful and the lighting look nice. And that takes a certain amount of time. So the cohesion of all of those sort of elements, trying to work them all so they work in unison together, like a sort of orchestra. And then you're ready to make the shot and everyone's ready to go. And hopefully you only need to do it once. because you've got squibs going off all over the place and dust hits. It'll be a huge sweep up, and I have to have the mops out and brushes, and PAs will rush in there to tidy up the spilt flowers and blood that's spattered everywhere. And if you were to do a second take, it could be, an hour before, or more before you're able to do a second take, which in a short day is debilitating. So it's an enormous amount of communication, talking with people, taking people through it. When you're making a low budget film, you're working with usually fairly inexperienced crew who have not done anything of the scale that I might be choosing to ask them to do. So not only are you telling them how to, what it is, you're explaining to them how to do what they should know what to do, but they have never done it before because they've simply not had experience. So you're letting them know this is where that tool that you have on your belt comes in useful, because now, if anything goes wrong, you've got to, and it's, so it can be a nerve-wracking experience on so many different levels. And you have to remain calm. You have to remain collected and approachable and articulate, which is tricky.
How involved were you with the ins and outs of the stunts and choreography? I mean, did you try to stay away, or is that something you still wanted to be actively involved in?
We had a second unit running, but I'd seen all of the I watched the choreography physically. I'd been there and watched what they were preparing for me in rehearsal with Thomas, with Jess Liaudin, with the stunt doubles and the stunt coordinator. I purposely didn't want to be involved in the second unit. I shoot up to the first punch, and I shoot from the bloody ending. I shot that, which established the lighting style, the setups, the set, the wardrobe. And from that point, they can get on with it. There's no reason for me to be there. They've shot previews with a video camera telling me which angles they're going to shoot. Thomas knows what he needs to do in terms of performance. Jess Liaudin and a second unit director who's worth anything will help making sure that they're aware of, when their eyes should be wider, or whether, it looks like they're focusing on the choreography, which is the worst thing in the world, or they're in the moment. So all he has to do is remind them to stay in the moment, but all they're really doing is filling in what they've already done. For, when you're directing actors in a scene, you're looking for those sparks of interest and little moments that you can make it. When you're shooting an action scene, you're not doing that. You have, because everything's been prepared, everything that's going to break has been prepared to break around them. You can't suddenly say, you know what, I want to shoot on that wall instead, because they won't have reinforced it. They won't have breakaway, wood there. Yeah. But really, the second unit director needs to stick to what we've all talked about ahead of time. The lighting guys have lit it for them, and then they go through it, and they so they did that based upon all of the notes I'd given them and what we had planned. And it's what I did for years and years. I have no interest in going back to shooting that sort of thing. But I was very heavily involved in creatively designing it and just written at the script, which I wrote. But I trust those guys a lot. That was a guy called Dan Stiles, who's worked for me for 3 or 4 films and is very safety conscious, is good with choreography, and is good with the actors. And the guy shooting it was Rob Polgar, who shot second unit for me for 3 or 4 films and knows what I like and how I like a shot to be framed. And so it was good. It was good that, and also the sheer sort of tightness of the schedule meant that I had to have 2 units running, sometimes 3. But I do recall that we had an assistant director who was crying because it became too frustrating for him to run between the 2 sets, and I feel terrible about that. And to this day, I'm sorry that he got to that point where it was so frustrating and upsetting for him. But it was very complicated, and we had a stunt double for Thomas, and then the real Thomas, but we didn't have a stunt double for Jess Liaudin. So Jess was going backwards and forwards between the 2 sets, and it was the same wardrobe. But his makeup had to change because I don't know if you remember, but he has an eye popped out and scratches. And so that had to be watched and wiped off and then reapplied over there.
Yeah, so you had to, so all the consistency issues,
I think that was
to worry about the
cause of the tears. It was just very, I think the makeup people got very mad at him, and he didn't know.
It's easy to run into a continuity issue with all that kind of fun stuff.
So it becomes very frustrating, but for a lot of people. But ultimately, it all came together, and I'm very proud of it as a film. It's a hell of a difficult film. No one goes to see a film and sees a listing of all the difficulties you had to deal with in making it or how low the budget was. They have to sit and watch the film for the sake of whether it worked or not. And I'm proud of what we pulled off. The fact that Lionsgate have got behind it is wonderful, and they've given it a theatrical release, which is incredibly bold and ballsy and brave of them in this day and age, where the only films that are getting theatrical releases are huge star-driven pictures. They like this one. So
well, they've actually done pretty well with a number of things like that of late. I think that a Jesus Revolution being one of them. I think that they've films that you wouldn't think would get that kind of thing. I think they've done. What turned out to be your favorite scene to shoot in the film, and was it the one you thought it would be when you were writing the script?
But funnily enough, when I heard that this was going to get a theatrical of the size it was, I was terrified because, it's like the film is so small. I've done bigger films than this, but this is the one that got chosen. It is interesting that Lionsgate chose to put it out theatrically. But yeah, so my favorite scene in the picture, there's two. And they both involve Declan McBride, who's played by Dean Jagger, who I think is an enormously interesting actor with a very subtle range. The first is when he visits the formerly Ukrainian base that's been taken over by a Russian Cossack, where he's buying his artillery piece, and they drive on in the Jeep. And I like that moment. I like that. For me, that's interesting because that's when the film skips, and it's no longer just a film about good guys and bad guys. And you start to realize this fellow is an international bad guy, and it's, has got something else going on. And then the other scene I really enjoyed was the one with the little choir singer in the church, when McBride visits an old accomplice of his who's played by Patrick Bergin, who I'm an enormous fan of. I actually paid for Patrick Bergin in this movie as well, because they refused to pay the production. And the scene that they share, where he's trying to convince Dean to step away from whatever it is he's doing and take a back seat, and in doing that, he has his sort of little kid there, his grandson, sing Foggy Doo, which is one of the old Republican songs, but it's a very, very moving Irish song. And it does move him, but it still doesn't move him enough to throw in the towel and quit what he's doing. And for me, that's an important scene, and I liked it. It was very emotional, and it was good. But these are interesting sort of scenes that you have to sort of invest in to sort of enjoy. And I'm not sure how successful they were, but for me, the two scenes I found very good and fun to shoot and interesting, and I felt that you walked away and it felt like there was something interesting going on there. The rest, it was just hard work, and it's such a blur because you're just working at warp speed and hoping to get the scene in the camera by the end of the day and not get arrested or have anyone get hurt.
No, the film is fantastic, and I hope everyone in our audience will take the time to go watch it. Another film you've got coming up is Boudica with Olga, is it Kurylenko? Yes. And Clive Standen. Yes. My assistant producer is a bit of a historian, so he's extremely excited about this film. You're both writer and director once again on this. Where did the idea come about, to write this script about a historical figure like Boudica? And can you tell us anything about it right now, or is it kind of still?
I can tell you a certain amount about it. I grew up very, very interested with the Boudica mythology. Every English schoolboy child knew about it in my era. Boudica was the warrior who pulled together for the first time all of the British tribes in AD 60 to fight against the colonial Romans who had colonized Britain at that time. Now, Britain was not one country; it was a multitude of different tribes, Celts, different Iceni, different forms, and who had no real relation to each other. A crime was committed against Boudica, who at the time was allied to the Roman cause, and it was a crime of such such a despicable nature that it allowed her the moral sort of wherewithal to band a formerly dysfunctioning nation together as one. And at the height of her army, it was almost 250,000 troops. And she took on the Romans, and for about 5 battles, she beat them relentlessly. And then the army became unmanageable. They sent to Rome for one of these specialist guys who, Suetonius, Paulinus Suetonius, who came with his crack troops, and he set a trap for her, and that was the end of that. I think they executed all 250,000 of her army, men, women, children, animals, and that was the end of that. But for a brief flickering light, this one person existed who had the charisma and the wherewithal to pull everyone together. British archaeologists or archaeologists in the UK can time a particular period because of the dark black line in the earth that her looting and burning left, to this day, because the sand and clay was turned to almost a glass material with the high heat of of Colchester, London, Culloden, these different places that cities at the time. They were Roman cities that were inhabited by Romans who'd been there, almost 100 years, and had property and slaves and had subjugated or pushed away the natural inhabitants. So she went into these places and just destroyed them, burned them to the ground. Didn't even pillage them in many cases, literally just burnt them. And I found the story very interesting. In Victorian era, looking for someone who was like Victoria as a form of political sort of propaganda, they had rediscovered her. So there's a beautiful statue of Boudica outside the Houses of Parliament in England, and we actually used that in the movie. And she became a figurehead again. She's Britannia. She's Rule Britannia. This is basically Boudica with the helmet on. It's on the coins to this day. And Rule Britannia, which is the national anthem, it's Boudica. It's all based around that mythology and that sort of story. I found it even more interesting. I'm not sure why I took such a personal connection to it, but my youngest daughter's middle name is Boudica. So it's been a while. It's a lot of my heart and soul and blood, sweat and tears in the movie. And it's something that I hope people see for what it is, which is a passionate retelling of a here to less than well presented story. There's been lots of versions of it, and I think they're all terrible. I haven't seen one that caught my interest in any way at all. And it took me a long time to figure out how to tell the story, and I think I have done. And I hope people enjoy it. Olga Kurylenko is someone I had worked with before, and I knew she had the capacity to do something like this. She's incredible. She absolutely inhabits the role and is very, very dedicated, very disciplined, and really threw herself into the action, which is no small thing, because fighting with a sword, a heavy sword, is not something for the faint of heart. I mean, it's extraordinary. And the guys she was fighting all had armor on and helmets, and it was a brutal shoot. But the interesting factor was where we shot was 20 miles away from Colchester. We're at Norfolk, and it just happened to be where we ended up filming because a friend of mine owned the property. And I was talking to him. He said, no, she galloped here. She was here. We have Roman artifacts that we found all over the place, and you're 20 miles from the first place that she burned. That's where there's a museum there for the Roman temple that she burnt to the ground. It's now this beautiful museum in Colchester. So I feel that she inhabited the film to a certain degree. That may be too much mumbo jumbo for many, but for me, it instilled in me the need to tell the story properly as well. I really, really felt that. And something looked after us, because I love the movie. I think it's the greatest thing I've done. I'm really, really, really proud of that film. So I'm looking forward to hearing what you think of it, David.
So what else should we be on the lookout for in the next year or so from you? Have you got some other things coming up?
Well, Savannah releasing Boudica at the end of the year. And then early next year, we have a film called Chief of Station with Aaron Eckhart, which is a throwback to the sort of Cold War spy films that we all, of a certain generation, remember from pre-Gorbachev, Reagan, before the wall came down, which, it was great fun to delve into that. I watched, the Bridge of Spies is the most recent one that everyone will know about of this generation. But you go further back, The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, even most of the James Bond films, the Fourth Protocol, there's a great, bedding in it. And the most beautiful thing of all, which I really liked, is in modern spycraft, the reliance upon internet and telephone has gone out the window because it's too easy to crack. So now spies are going back to the old, dead drops and brush passing and all these wonderful techniques that was perfected in Cold War, Germany and Russia after the Second World War. When you had this antagonism between East and West, and so but it's a modern setting, but they're still using these older techniques now, which have come back, and almost come back around. So they can't even make a telephone call on a cell phone because it's too easily tracked. They'll pinpoint them. They'll be thrown
compromised.
Drop a hand grenade on their head. So
yeah.
It's all the Stone Age is the way to do it now. And so I went back and watched tons of these pictures, the John le Carre films,
all this off the grid stuff.
Oh my God, it was fantastic watching and realizing we can bring a lot of this into the present. So I tried to put in as much as possible. Aaron Eckhart is wonderful. Nick Moran, who's also in One Ranger, he plays the Russian Cossack, is also in that. He plays the lead. He was the lead in Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels, which a lot of people may remember. And he's wonderful in it. And Olga Kurylenko came back, and Alex Pettifer, who I'm now doing another film with, plays the antagonist and does a really scary good job, and is wonderful. And I think it's a bit of a return for him to big budget. We have car chases and shootouts. It's really, really rather good. And I loved working in Budapest, Hungary. It was a wonderful place to shoot. Short days. It was nighttime by 3:00. So you got to be you got to go in with a really good plan. You can't be sitting around scratching your chin, waiting for inspiration. One of my great sort of loves is Sam Peckinpah and his pictures. But when I first came to Los Angeles, I have 8 or 10 biographies on him. I searched out people that had worked with him to get anecdotes to listen. And Clark Coleman is a stuntman. His father was Cliff Coleman, who was the first assistant director on The Wild Bunch. And they said that when he was preparing that shootout, he had no plan whatsoever, and literally took 3 or 4 days to sort of scratch his head and come up with a way of shooting it.
Jesse, thank you so much for joining us tonight. And you've been so generous with your time and sharing so much great information about, just the craft itself. We really appreciate it.
I hope there's something that's helpful to people, or interesting, or slightly of something, of help maybe. Really a pleasure talking to you. Great questions, David. Hopefully we can do it again.
Yes, thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, Director Jesse Johnson. That's our show for tonight. Thank you so much for watching. A special thanks to Director Jesse V. Johnson for joining us. Stay safe, everyone.